she's coming to this perfect moment where everything is sort of aligned for her to do as well as she could ever possibly do, right? My daughter. So she gets to stand basically on the shoulders of all the women who came before her and built this world that is free of legal barriers for her to accomplish her dreams. But she also gets all of the cultural and emotional and social wins that women have been forced to develop over 1,000 years of oppression. So you get all the access to academic intelligence. That is, you're going to be good at school and there's not legal barriers to go to school. But you also have access to all of the emotional intelligence men are not encouraged to develop. And I think the fact that we can't place men in that same place, we can't say, hey, you can do all the things you were supposed to do, and you have your emotional connections and your different social circles that you can engage in. They still can't do all that. But a woman right now, a young woman right now, not discounting all of the challenges that they face, particularly depending on what state you're in, gets basically or has access to essentially every advantage that would make a human successful. You're able to collaborate well, you're able to connect emotionally with everyone, and you have access to the same educational opportunities.
This is Joy Silver, the joy of democracy, on today's episode of A Broad and a Bro. Michael Johnson is with us. He is a data professional. How do you feel about being a bro to this broad, Michael?
Hey, Joy, I could not be more thrilled to be your bro today.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. We're doing some deep dives into this whole idea of gender and power and how that works out and how men define themselves and how women define themselves and how people define themselves who are both or neither. So today we're talking to you to talk a little bit about men and your background and what you see happening in the United States today with these issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really, really relevant topic for us to talk about. Particularly, we saw with the 2024 general election, we had these essentially unprecedented shifts, particularly for like low propensity voters like young men, making this rightward shift towards Donald Trump. Recently we had this documentary on Netflix, the Manosphere. Like this is part of a larger conversation, and it's one that I think liberals, anyone left of center, certainly the Democratic Party, is really trying to play catch up. And I think it's really great that we have the opportunity for these conversations because this is the only way we're going to sort of figure out that path forward for this issue.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, and certainly the term manosphere is a big term that's being used right now. And recently, in an interview I did with Politics Girl, Lee McGowan, she pointed out something that kind of turned my whole view around.
And the thing about the patriarchy is, it always seems like when we talk about it, we are man-hating, and we're not. I am raising a man. I am married to a man. I only have my father left in my life. Like, I am surrounded by men. I love men. That's not the point. Patriarchy hurts men just as much as it hurts everyone else. Women suffer under patriarchy more than men do, but men suffer as well. There's a reason there's a male loneliness epidemic. There's a reason that the people that shoot themselves and commit suicide, the highest rate of those people are men over 60 who are alone and feel lonely. There's a reason that most serial killers are men. There's a reason the people that shoot up schools are young, disenfranchised men. There's a reason they're saying now that all these men are living at home just on their computers because they would rather do that than go out into the world and be rejected by women. That's actually it's the patriarchy that's hurting them, not women.
It's not that women haven't been supportive of men or young men. Actually, their mothers and then their sisters and all of us, basically. But she said that it's the toxic masculinity that's being purported to be what maleness is today. Men and young men have been left out of that power, and they are the ones who have identified the segmentation of who has power and who doesn't. And so the real cause and the culprit in the non-supportive young men has been this definition of what manhood really means.
I couldn't agree more. And I will say, I really enjoyed the episode you did with Politics Girl. And I think it's really important that we have these conversations both with women being in a position to advocate for men and having men in those spaces as well. Like we really need to have everybody having these conversations And the piece about toxic masculinity and men sort of, excuse me, falling behind while women advanced, I think is a really great way to frame it. Because I think it's abundantly clear that men are still at the top of any given hierarchy that exists, right? We have to acknowledge that this is the truth. And what we've done, I think, over the last 50, 100 years, depending on how far we want to go back, is right, we've broken down a lot of institutional barriers to women. They couldn't vote, right? That's gone. Essentially was legalized discrimination in the workplace. That's gone. Now we have continued discrimination in those places, but in the sense that they were institutionalized in like actual written law, those sort of challenges, right, no longer exist. And I think one of the places that we, and I'm going to say we, meaning folks on the left, have failed to really understand this issue. So, this idea of toxic masculinity, it is an academic framework. And those of us on the left have a real connection to these sort of intellectual pursuits, academia, right? The stats are the stats. The higher educated you are, the more likely you are to be somewhere left of center. But what I don't think we've done a great job of doing is translating these concepts and applying them in a way that is like actually fair. So I will say for most, I think most young men of my demographic, the phrase toxic masculinity is in and of itself now toxic because what they perceive that to be is you hate men. You don't like what I am. And setting aside like any bad behavior, which there is a lot, you're unlikely to get people on your side if they perceive that you don't like them. Human beings do not enjoy being disliked, right? And Lee was completely right when she basically spoke about how toxic masculinity is not saying men are bad. It is actually saying men are victims of this patriarchy, right? There is this
Exactly.
larger social system set up and it hurt women and it continues to hurt women. But the ways in which it hurt women were, at least for a very long time, again, like laws. These were legal restrictions that said you cannot do something because you're a woman. And those are, I don't want to downplay the struggle, but those are relatively straightforward to attack. That is, we have a law, we need to remove that law, right? It's not easy necessarily to change it, but we know what we're trying to target. But the way in which toxic masculinity and the patriarchy has affected men is much more cultural, it's much more social, it's much more nefarious. And we haven't done a really good job of addressing that, particularly because it's a very hard thing to address. It's not a law in the books you need to replace. But I think those of us on the left, we haven't had good conversations about like, we're not saying men are bad. We're saying you are a victim of this system and we want to help you. We want to bring you with us, right? As women have progressed on this journey of being able to be much fuller participants in society, we haven't said, hey, men, this is going to be for your benefit as well, too. And I think
Right.
that's one of the places where we've left open for like the manosphere to bring those men in and sort of brainwash them, for lack of a better word.
And I want to go into a term that no one is actually using now, but we could be using, and that is what is toxic femininity? And if I look at that, I see the barbitization. And when I say that, the Barbieized what females are like and how they exist, and the cosmetic surgery that's been
Mhm.
happening for women who are
MAGA
perceived as
face.
leader, right, right, perceived as leadership on the right, and then the ultimate the blaming of women who have those positions, and then trad wives, and this really goes back to a cultural idea in the 70s where we watched the Stepford Wives, and this was the announcing of this particular issue. And so we're not talking about what's happened to women in that same way that we're saying toxic masculinity. I mean, if we look at what's fueled this call to might is right, and the hierarchy of military school and who is on top and who gets to haze who in these fraternities. I mean, this is a long-standing initiation into what it means to have power as men, and what does that actually look like. So the fueling of Christian nationalism, for example, and to see men as, well, you've been victimized by this system that's put the natural order of men and women to some kind of topsy-turvy world, and we're trying to pull it back. There's a lot there. And even if we go back to Genesis, if we're going to use the Bible in any way, obviously it was written by two different people with two different points of view. God created man and woman, right, together out of clay. And then later on, Eve becomes a rib of Adam. So there's definitely a big change that happened in the narrative there. And what I hear you addressing, and correct me if I don't have this exactly right, you're addressing the cultural aspects as well. The narratives, where are the heroes of a balanced view of gender power? Where do we see that? Instead, we've been treated to what used to be called video games. I'm not even sure if it's still called that, but action films seem to be based about that. And that was something that we spoke about as well before. I know you and I have had conversations about that as well. How do you see that in the cultural sense?
Yeah. So it absolutely all layers together. And I think part of it is because we weren't having a conversation about what men could be as we broke down these sort of gendered walls, right? We allowed women to pursue whatever they'd like to pursue, right? And that is in keeping with really the American ideal of freedom. So we allowed women to sort of be whatever they wanted to be, with ups and downs there. But we never really said to men, hey, you don't have to be this ridiculous stereotype that Pete Hegseth throws up now, that this warrior ethos where all you're really saying is you're a bully. That's the essential
Quite well taken there.
piece of what they're talking about. So we never gave any models for men to be like, hey, you don't need to be the thing that patriarchy told you had to be. And so what we're left with is men don't know what they're allowed to be. And the only role models that are out there saying I'm a role model for men, right? I can think of any number of men who could be role models. Like Tim Walz, I think was like a great example of like what we would love a man to be. He does all the stereotypical manly things. He hunts. I don't know. He might be a lumberjack. And he appears to be an incredibly genuine human being who likes to help other people, right? He is the quintessential or a perfect example of what we would really like masculinity to be. But folks like Tim Walz are not out there saying, I'm what a man should be. The only people out there saying, I'm what a man should be are the Pete Hegseths of the world, are the Andrew Tates of the world. So when young men are looking around and they're saying, who am I supposed to be? The only one out there in their ear saying this is what you're supposed to be is the exact example we don't want them to take.
But
And to the super, go
the
ahead.
examples, though, and I want you to go on with that, but the examples they're there, but they're not as promoted. Okay.
Yes, yes,
Because
exactly.
what is the goal? The goal in a power play is to victimize some section of people so that they will feed the power base
Yes.
that wants to stay in power or grab for more power. So I think there's that aspect to it.
And you're absolutely right. So in either direction, whether we take the enlightened masculinity, right, that I'll just say is represented by Tim Walz, just because that example is in our head right now, or the toxic masculinity of Andrew Tate, Pete Hegseth, in both cases, we are saying like there is something that is holding you down. Now, in this enlightened masculinity, it's a broader system. It's a cultural patriarchy, and it's something that men and women can fight together, right? It is teamwork. It is collaboration. In this toxic masculinity environment, in our Andrew Tates or our Pete Hegseths, it's women are holding you down. Minorities are holding you down. The enemy is an external person that they can then build power on, right? They say, I will help you fix your problems if you help me attack this group I don't like.
Right. And so, and that's the pieces of dissociating all the groups that actually should be fighting together in order to
Yes.
fix the actual power bases. That's true. So you find yourself, and I experience you very comfortable in your own identity. How did you get there?
So I was super lucky because for two reasons. One, I grew up pre-social media. So like there weren't smartphones. I had a cell phone. I'm not that old. but there were no smartphones. There was no high speed internet. So, like, there was no Google. So I didn't have social media from the moment I was born. And I think that that is an incredibly important piece. That is a whole other topic. So I'm just going to say social media compounds all of the issues we're talking about here. So I didn't have that as an environment. So I was very lucky there. But the other thing that was really unique for me is that I had a stay-at-home dad. My mom has always been the primary breadwinner. And so from the very beginning, I got this picture of what masculinity could be that didn't involve all of the other toxic components. And my dad, who was born in 1946, so he is like the quintessential boomer, right? He grew up with all of the things that probably helped perpetuate toxic masculinity, but he didn't have to reinforce that with me because we lived in a household where my mom was the primary breadwinner. And I immediately saw, oh, men can just be, they can be the primary parent. They can be the person who takes care of the house. And the other thing that was particularly unique for me is that he also did a lot of traditionally masculine things. He worked on cars, wasn't a lumberjack, but he could do outdoor activities. So I got like the best of both worlds, and that's a very unique situation. But I think it let me see through what might otherwise pull me into, because I'm of the generation that is getting pulled into Andrew Tate, where I might otherwise go down that path. I had this example, this model for me that said, hey, that doesn't have to be what a man is. So I was very unique in that circumstance, and it let me sort of get to where I am today.
Well, if you were to give, and I say specifically, young men some kind of counsel, how would you support them in finding out who they were and how to get comfortable in their role or finding a role in our culture and in our society today?
What a question. That is admittedly very tough. One of the things I would say is you need to break out of digital bubbles.
Ah,
The time that you spend online, and in particularly when you're spending it on any social media that is algorithm driven. So any platform that wants to feed you pieces of content that it thinks you're going to like is likely going to harm you if you are spending an inordinate amount of time on it. So to the extent that you can, as the kids would say, touch grass, if you can find other people in real life to meet up with, and particularly a wider group of those, so don't just target people that you already think are going to think like you, that is probably going to be one of the most helpful things you can do for yourself. And this is going to be a real challenge. And there's a whole other set of studies that talk about how this is really challenging. But you should try to find female friends. So part of the issue is that along the journey of men and women and the patriarchy and all the things around it, and there's some nature to this as well. It's not fully nurture, but women are better handling being alone. So there is study after study after study that says single women tend to be happier than single men. And a large part of that seems to be around the fact that women are able to create more meaningful friendships than men are. And we don't teach men how to have meaningful friendships, and that's a whole other issue. So to the extent that you can find women that you can be friends with and try to understand what it means to have meaningful, deep friendships, that will probably be the thing that keeps you out of this toxic masculinity pipeline, because you're going to have other influences that you can lean on and actually be emotionally vulnerable with in a way that doesn't always translate to be angry, is going to be really powerful. Those are also really hard things to do. The biggest challenge to this is because we're talking about cultural and social issues, it has to be really broad. Like any individual is only going to be able to do so much. And some of what they're going to be able to do is limited by the fact that they're, under the control or the influence of this culture that we're trying to break free of. So it has to be like a really, really wide operation. And that's why I love these conversations, because this is really part of it. Like we need to be in the zeitgeist talking about this in the same way that your Andrew Tates and your Pete Hegseths have been doing for the last decade or more.
What do you think is the opposite of the term? And I'll give you a second to think about it, but what is the opposite term to manosphere? I was just thinking about that myself, and I'm not sure. I mean, is it a sewing circle? I mean, that doesn't seem right to me. So what is the opposite term? There's this whole idea that this sphere of men participating in some sort of large cultural place somewhere.
Mhm.
Not even sure where it is. Where is
Yeah,
it?
I don't know that it exists,
Right.
which is part of the challenge. Like I don't know that there is a ready-made space for men that doesn't lead to the manosphere. And part of that is because we never built any space for men to be together. Men have always existed in this system that says whatever you provide is your value, and that's it. And over time, what we've done is we've allowed, not allowed, we have made it equal so that women can fully participate in that creation of value. You know, we're usually talking about money, but any material goods and applicable in any society. And we haven't told men, hey, by the way, your value isn't actually tied to what you produce anymore. So anytime we have any group of men together, there's a high chance they're going to end up in this sort of more toxic space because they don't even necessarily have the language to talk about what it means to be a man without those toxic influences. And this is why I think it's it can't just be women doing this, but I think it is incredibly valuable to have conversations like you had with Politics Girl because there are not a lot of spaces or opportunities for men to see women who appear to be on their side. They are. Obviously women are. But like you said about it's about getting in front of people, you know, Tim Walz is our enlightened masculinity, but he's not out there saying he is. And in the same way that the majority of women are on the side of men, men don't see that, so they don't perceive that to be true. And so what do we call this new space? Unfortunately, manosphere was such a catchy phrase. I don't know that I have a great answer for that. I know it is a collaborative space, and I know it cannot probably be just men at this moment in time. I could imagine some world in the future in which we have a larger group of men who feel more comfortable talking about issues in a way that doesn't lead them down toxic paths. But I don't know that we're really there yet. So I think it really has to be a blended gender space.
And it needs to be created probably. What situations would show, because you said that men don't perceive that women are on their side. So that means they've been really separated from the support that they've received from women. What is it that how is it that they would be able to see the support? I mean, I think about the initial conversation and the top of our conversation. Women have supported men.
Yes.
Mothers support their sons. Grandmothers think their grandsons are the kings of the world. And where is it that how did they become disparate from
Yeah.
the understanding that women do support them and provide them with all the emotional and backup that they're looking at or looking for? How do we show this? What shows it to the general population?
I think probably for a broad swath of particularly young men, it's not necessarily going to be a conversation around the actual material support. So let's be very clear. The patriarchy rests on a foundation of work that was done by women. It does not exist without women doing all of the work that men said was women's work. Like it just doesn't exist. So even the idea that like men were actually leading any charge is basically nonsense. They were doing activities that were they could do because women were doing 10,000 other things
Yeah,
in the
to
home.
their ability
Yeah.
to go out into the yeah.
Yeah. And so by no means is that not an important piece to this narrative. It is because it's crucial to understanding how we got here. But in terms of how to make young men understand that women are supporting them, one is just having conversations with women saying, hey, I'm supporting you. But like one of the things that I'm going to keep referencing Politics Hero because it was a it was such a good interview. So for anyone who watches this one, go watch the Politics Girl episode. But she talked about, I think she talked about, you know, the majority of suicides are men, right? The majority of job deaths are men. Men are predominantly the only ones going to war. There's other issues about why that is the case, but there are these issues that Like if you look at the stats, it is a men's issue. There are these crises that are happening to men, but because it usually only gets talked about in manosphere spaces, the only voices young men hear talking about issues that they know do affect them are from people who want to take them down this other pipeline. So what is it? How do we show men and young men that women support them? I think we have to be like very honest and open with conversations about there are issues that are facing men that are only facing men. Yes, women commit suicide, but the overwhelming majority of men are committing suicide. The overwhelming majority of homeless people are men. And I don't think a gendered solution is correct to any of those problems. That is, I'm
Right,
not going to
right.
propose like, hey, let's do policy that only supports
Targets.
homeless men. But when we have conversations about it, we should talk about like, well, why is it predominantly men? And how do we help men? The actual policy will always almost be an ungendered policy, and that's fine. None of these conversations are going to be a policy. People are not interested in that policy. They want to know that you recognize that they are a person that has real issues. And I acknowledge that some of this is going to be like so ridiculous for women to do because for the last 2000 plus years you've been like, hey, can you recognize that I have problems? And now all of a sudden it's like, well, men have problems too. But I don't know how we get there without just saying, yes, we acknowledge that men have problems, and we need to address those things. I think a great example of this, maybe not saying I have a solution, but like a really good lens to view this through, is academic achievement. So essentially for the last, let's say, 2 decades or so, women have been steadily outpacing men in academic achievement, right? So from the very beginning that we said, hey, women, there's not going to be a legal barrier to you getting an education anymore. Women have run with that, and there's probably some evidence that from a natural basis, women might be more inclined to educate themselves in the way that we educate. Like they may just be more naturally inclined to have classroom education be really beneficial to them in a way that isn't for men. But that means that there's going to be over time more and more educated women. They're going to be out earning men, and I don't think we thought about that as a problem because it shouldn't be a problem if the culture around men had advanced at the same pace. That is, hey, it's fine if women out earn you. That doesn't matter. But it didn't, right? So we've set up all of these things that appear to lift women, and most of them are just knocking down barriers. They're not actually like some special
Equality
program that
driven.
uplifts women. Yeah, it's equality driven.
Opportunity. Equality opportunity driven.
Opportunity, yeah. But what it meant is we did not circle back and say, hey, men, are you guys doing okay? And the answer was a resounding no, because we just assumed that, like, well, if we're all equal, then I think all the cultural stuff should just sort
That
of
would
fall by
fix
the
it.
wayside. But it didn't, is the issue.
Right.
And I think we have to make a real active stance to knock that stuff down. And I know sometimes it feels silly to say, well, what opportunity don't men have? It's not legal. It's not academic. It is social. It is the emotional intelligence component. And it's probably going to be even more important as we hear about, AI and the impact on the workforce. The thing that it can't reproduce is human creativity, is emotional intelligence, all the things that for the last however many thousand years, we've actually been forcing women to develop because we wouldn't let them do anything else. And now they're in this position where they can leverage all of that. So it's super exciting for me as a father. Um, and I also look at it and go, man, we need to do more to give those same opportunities, those same emotional and social opportunities to men. I don't know how, I don't have a solution there, but I think that's going to be really important as we move forward as a country.
You're listening to Michael Johnson, and he's telling us we need to have more young men and more men in general get on this show and have these
Yes.
conversations abroad and abroad. So, listening out there, men of any and all ages, contact Sam Page or info@unitedamericannetwork.com and come on and talk with us on Abroad and Abro. Thank you so much, Michael, and I hope to hear from you again. We have much more to talk about. Appreciate
Thank you
your
so much,
time
Greg.
today. This has been Joy Silver on Joy of Democracy.